thing you do, in addition to the broad development, is the targeting. The targeting can be geographical, because when China opened up the economy around 1980 in its reform process, it was the coastal areas that jumped ahead, and I was asked around the year 2000 to have a look at the western provinces, because they were lagging behind. The big investments came to all the coastal regions, whether Tianjin, Beijing, Shanghai, or down the coast to Guangdong and so forth. These were the coastal developments, but the interior needed a focus, and so the Western China Development Program was introduced by China around 2000 as a geographical program. But then there's also the targeting at the individual level, the kind of social support for very poor children, the intention that everybody, down to the poorest of people, needs health care, needs adequate nutrition, may need specific social support or social protection, may need some guidance by a social worker. And so there's all these different layers. By far the most important, actually, is the broad-based development, because that does lift a great part of the population. But you need to target those geographical regions that are not being lifted by the broad development automatically, and you need to target, even within affluent cities, people whose, for whatever their fate, disabilities, bad luck, individual circumstances are suffering. And that was the kind of triple approach China used and will apply in the African context.
In your book, you mentioned disease, like malaria, and you mentioned that when people are trapped in poverty, because there is a lack of human resources, they tend to stay there. In Africa's case, let's start there, there's malaria, whereas that is not a major issue in China. So I'm wondering, over the last 10 or 20 years, has the United Nations made good headway in terms of eradicating some of these diseases?
Well, it's interesting. You think poverty leaves you vulnerable to disease, but disease makes you poor, and the causation, therefore, goes in both directions. And in the African context, I've argued, it's not completely without some controversy, but I've argued that because Africa's disease background, with many tropical diseases that are quite specific to Africa or intense in Africa for many geographical reasons, is actually one of the explanations of Africa's historic poverty, and malaria is probably the poster child of that, because malaria is a disease that thrives in hot tropical environments. And Africa also has a particular kind of mosquito, if you go into the details, that transmits malaria in a very efficient way. So my argument has been that one of the things that we need to do is to target the end of these tropical diseases. And I helped establish, now it's 24 years ago, something called the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. And it was set up to make this kind of focal investment in disease control. Now, when it came to malaria, it was a Chinese traditional herb, actually, Jinhua TX, which is the wormwood in English, but it's a pretty pernicious disease, and even remedies that we thought that were in hand, various insecticides and so forth, the disease agent mutates around those, or the mosquitoes mutate around those, so you're constantly in a battle, and this battle continues.
The hunger battles and wins every one of them. That military strategy does not lead to the technical of the enemy's capital city. Decoding the art of war will help you understand why there's no art in war, and how citizens stage undefeatable using the science of war, with fun stories and insightful breakdown of famous battles. And decoding the art of war wherever you listen.
He was the first Chinese citizen to graduate from Yale University in the mid-19th century.
There are two kinds of bottlenecks. One is the one you just mentioned. You need good projects at the core of long-term development. And I stress that's infrastructure and investing in people, especially in education and in their basic health. And so that's where the funding should be directed as a